Welcome you back to the Patrick Netherton Show here on 1130 The Tiger. He's Rogers, I'm Patrick. We're pleased to welcome in from The Athletic LSU beat writer Brody Miller. Also, he is... congratulations are in order for you, Brody, because you become the first person that we've actually put the mug up while we're doing the interview on our Facebook Live feed. We're getting modernized around here. We finally have an HD video feed on Facebook. We finally have some updated graphics. And you get to be the first one whose mug and name is actually on during the interview. So I'm sure that goes right up there with Peabodys and Pulitzers that you potentially might win. So congratulations, sir.
You know, you should have put a different picture up. You should have put like Brad Pitt or something up there.
I mean, I could have. I could have.
I would have appreciated it.
Who would know? You know, I mean, that's the that's the great thing about being a reporter. You know, you can.
No one knows.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody knows what you look like. And look, half the time y'all are using pictures from a decade ago anyway. I know yours isn't. Yours is pretty updated since you went to The Athletic. But I know a lot of people that are sports writers that love to put to keep the old 10-year mug up there. They're not afraid to do that. All right.
Hey man, I'm probably going to go downhill one of these days.
Well, I mean,
I'm never
look,
going to change my photo.
take advantage of it while you can. I never had it, so I couldn't take advantage of it. Wow, the Ravens are Ravens scored. Nope, incomplete pass and the half runs out. Holy cow, the Ravens had a running clock. They ran it into the line on second and goal, didn't get it. Clock still running, no timeouts. They line up on third. They throw the pass to the tight end, which is knocked away, and the half expires, and the Ravens get no points. Holy cow.
Well, I have the under, so I'm not going to.
Well, there you go. You're in good shape then. Really just a bizarre sequence of events right there. And also the tight end should have held on also. So, all right, Brody, let's talk a little bit about LSU. Finally, it's not the defense's fault for once. They play a really good game, very, very solid game against A&M. So let's start with the offensive line, which was the obvious area of concern. Craig Elko, who Orlovsky and Wischusen made sure to mention 487,000 times. Great defensive coordinator, very good with his blitz packages, disguises things very well. What did you see from the offensive line perspective that either gave you concern or you look at it and go, okay, that's just A&M being really good defensively?
Yeah, I think, well, first off, I think the overall gist is, I think mainly it's very concerning for LSU in multiple ways. One, the offensive line just did not look very in tune. They did not look, some of the errors were very preventable mistakes. Two, you almost become kind of concerned with schematically just what about LSU? One, couldn't adjust. Two, what about it was so predictable that, and that gets to the third thing, which is, Mike Elko called a heck of a game, and they've talked about it at length this week, but he did a really good job of basically overloading one side, and then they've learned what LSU's tendencies are when they do that, so they basically confused him and then sent pressure from the other directions and basically completely confused this LSU offensive line for sure. But I think, to some extent, your takeaway has to be, well, then how are you that predictable, And I think that's part of it, and then how do they not adjust better? But some of it, Chasen Hines, just no ifs, ands, or buts, had a really, really bad day and what's been a pretty down year for a guy that, honestly, I actually thought was, when he came in as a freshman in 2018 and, filled in a few times as an 18-year-old, looked really good. I'm like, that guy's going to be a 2 or 3 year starter on the LSU line, and he has just had a really tough year. Ed Ingram, who's actually a guy who's going to be a second or third round pick probably, he had a tough day. Liam Shanahan, I don't think Liam Shanahan's doing that much wrong, but, his limitations, he's just not as talented as some of these guys. So you're really starting to see the downside. Do I think they'll always look as bad as they did Saturday? No, but it was a pretty rough day.
Well, and I guess you add to the fact that when you have Joe Burrow back there, he's a guy that because of how he was able to negotiate his classes last year, he could basically just be a film rat, if you will, like a gym rat, but with film. And so you couldn't confuse him. You couldn't catch him off guard. You couldn't, put up looks that he wasn't going to be prepared for. And you just don't have that with Finley or Johnson.
Absolutely, yeah. I always like to point out last year, don't get me wrong, I'll give LSU credit for, having the Joe Morrow winning offensive line. And that offensive line does deserve a lot of credit for how it went from, one of the actual worst in college football to one of the better ones. But I actually have the hot take that I don't think that LSU offensive line last year was exceptional or anything like that. I thought it was a pretty good one, not a great line, and Joe Burrow just did a lot to make them look incredible. And I think right now this year's offensive line, unfortunately, I think there's a few guys on there that they expected to be better, yes. But I think it was always going to be an offensive line that didn't have much experience, that, obviously the pandemic probably made that even tougher. And I just don't think they have a lot of cohesion. And what surprised me is how little depth they have. That you have guys like Anthony Bradford that they were so high on it. They can't even put him in a game right now. You have guys like, some of these freshmen they're crazy about. And I know you don't want to play freshman alignment in the SEC often, but let's put it this way. This is the best starting five they have, and it's pretty clear. And that's saying something.
Yeah, it's a bit of an issue, and it hasn't been a glaring issue up until now. And now you face Nick Saban and Alabama, where you thought Craig Elko was bad. Nick Saban's not an exotic blitzer necessarily until it gets to third and medium to long, and they'll dial some stuff up. But for the most part, Saban just has better players than you do, especially on that defensive front, and their secondary covers so well that they run into a lot of sacks that way. How concerned are you about Johnson, Finley, the O-line, lack of running game? Now Terrace Marshall is gone against an Alabama defense.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of with you on everything you're saying in that. First off, I actually, if you just look at, raw pressure numbers, pass rush numbers, stuff like that, or even stuff rate numbers, A&M's actually better than Bama in a lot of those ways. So there's an argument to be made that A&M will actually be a bigger challenge just for a pure offensive line point of view. But granted, at the end of the day, I'm still probably with you that it's Alabama and those players are just a little more talented. But I think the number one thing you pointed out that I mainly would agree with is that, yeah, Alabama is not historically one to get that exotic, while A&M was. Or I always like to highlight the 2018 Florida game where Florida and Todd Grantham were just dialing up these very, creative blitzes, and LSU's offensive line had no idea what they're doing. And that was actually pretty similar to the A&M game in a lot of ways. And that's where I think I think James Craig's a pretty good O-line coach, but I think that's what, when you look at the last 3 years of LSU O-lines in the Craig era, that's the kind of the trend, is that when it's those teams that get exotic and get creative, those are the ones that LSU really struggles with. But when they play a front that might be better, that is, that might be more talented, but they're pretty straightforward, that is when they weirdly always play better. I always think of, well, not this year, but 2018, for example, when that O-line was terrible, they played really well against Auburn because Kevin Steele doesn't get that exotic, you know? And I think Alabama's kind of similar. Am I saying I give LSU any kind of real advantage there? No, but it's at least one, hope you can hold out for.
Yeah, and going back to Burrow for one more point, I made this a couple of days ago. Another way Burrow saved you is, right, he would diagnose a blitz, he would call the protection, and even when he got it wrong, he would be able to see at the snap that he got it wrong and either get the ball out of his hand or move, because he had that mobility, or move around in the pocket where he knew, look, okay, I slid the line to the right. They're blitzing from the left. I messed that up. So I know that's coming from the left. I'm going to either roll, or I'm going to get out, or I'm going to just throw the ball out quick. With those young quarterbacks, you just don't have that ability to do that. So Burrow saves you both pre-snap and post-snap in that kind of way.
No, you're absolutely right. I think and by the way, I don't think Brennan was Burrow level, but let's also point out that I think Brennan was even better about those things, and there's also just, like you're saying, it's when you make a mistake, being able to make a quick decision out of it and figure out where the openings are. Brennan was not some superstar, but Brennan was able to do that too as a, fourth-year guy. And I think right now you're just really drastically seeing, the downsides of having two true freshmen, and not even just freshmen, because there are plenty of freshmen these days in college football who play really well, but it's the idea that they weren't even like some marquee freshmen, they were 3-star and low 4-star freshmen, guys who were always going to be more of development kind of things, and more, maybe even depth guys, if we're being honest. And now they're asked to, lead them into SEC games against the number one team in the country. It was always going to be an unfair situation. And it also kind of parlays into how I have a hard time even really torching the offensive staff or any of those guys. And a lot of people really want to criticize Steve Ensminger and Scott Linehan. And by the way, they deserve some. I'm not that naive, but I kind of think like, well, what did you expect?
Yeah, what do you think they're going to do?
They don't. your only option is really to succeed is to be a run-based team, but you don't even have that great of an O-line. Like, what do you think? What are your options? So I have a hard time with some of the criticism.
No, I agree with you. We're talking to Brody Miller of The Athletic down in Baton Rouge covering LSU. All right, so let's talk about the defense then, because they showed up. Didn't see the receivers running wide open through the secondary as we have in past games. They really shut down the run very well. What did you think was different? And I'll kind of give you my thoughts and see if they dovetail with yours. My major issue, and Orlovsky pointed it out multiple times, A&M's skill guys are really young. They're not necessarily good enough to beat a Darryl, a Stingley or a Flott even. So the young skill guys combined with, to me, a quarterback who has not progressed at all in the 3 years that he's been the starter, to me, that made the being the defenders a little bit easier. That you didn't have the guys running wide open because you could just play simple man coverage and you wouldn't get beat.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. Absolutely. They didn't have any real game changer in the receiving core like they have in some of the last few years. And like you said, Mond is a perfectly good quarterback. Mond is fine. I think a lot of people torch Mond a little too much, but he's not somebody who can make a difference in a game. And there should be a differentiation there. But yeah, I think it's that. And at the end of the day, though, I think I give a little bit of credit where it's due in the fact that this defense has been getting better 3 games in a row. As much as the Auburn game is the worst loss probably in recent memory at LSU, sometimes context is important. And, they actually shut them out for about 25 minutes. They looked really good that game. And then basically when those turnovers happened, they came 21-0. The defense just kind of gave up, and that's a different problem. But I don't know if that was necessarily indicative of what this defense was. And then you look at the Arkansas game, and it's, that they looked really good along the line of scrimmage against Arkansas, completely controlled the run for the most part. And then they really, again, context can be exhausting sometimes, but if you take out just the plays that came on Dwight McGlothern and Jay Ward, their 4th and 5th corners, which, those were really the only times they got beat that whole game. And if Stingley and Ricks were in all game, honestly, I think that would have been the breakout defensive game. But then all of a sudden, for, obviously those guys left and they got torched. So I think what really happened Saturday was that you saw just finally them kind of put it together. I think the way they're looking right now in the front 7, and I think a big credit of that deserves to Micah Baskerville. They finally, benched Damone Clark, who has all the talent in the world, but just doesn't seem to have the IQ parts of it right now. They benched him for a less talented guy in Micah Baskerville, who, doesn't have the physical tools necessarily, but just knows where to be, puts himself in the right spots. And you are seeing the difference. And you are seeing when the inside linebacker knows where he's going, that filters throughout the whole defense. So the entire front 7 has looked stouter in the run game. You're even seeing the safeties fill, and run plays so much better than they did those first 5 games. And I think you really have to start there. And then the other factor I'll just throw out there is, it's a little overly simplistic, is, they had a 2-week break because of the Florida postponement before the Auburn game, and you saw a little improvement. Then they had a bye after Auburn. Then the Alabama game got postponed again. So basically, they had 1 game in the span of 5 weeks.
Right.
And I think, considering this was a year where they didn't have a spring, I bet there's something to be said. You can't quantify this, but something to be said that was actually just kind of something of a spring ball for them. I agree.
Agreed wholeheartedly. Talking to Brody Miller of The Athletic. Terrace Marshall from up in our neck of the woods at Parkway and Bossier. I've been, I don't say yelling. I've been saying he should have come out after week 1, especially with his injury history at Parkway. This is a guy that had one of the most gruesome injuries that people, there was videotape of it circulating and people wouldn't look at it, of his injury in high school at Parkway because it was that gruesome. So, this is a kid that has fought back off of a pretty devastating injury to become one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the country this year. Are you surprised that he stuck around as long as he did? And then are you surprised that he left when he did right after giving that rah-rah speech to the team?
First off, I'm glad you framed it like that and not like a how could he.
No. I've wanted him to leave literally, and Rogers can, my producer can tell you, week 1, I was like, look, you proved what you needed to prove, right? You're good without Jamar Chase. You're good without Justin Jefferson. You're still a great wide receiver, not being quote unquote number 3. Leave. Like there's literally nothing for you to play for. And then as the season progressed the way it did, especially after that first loss, I'm like, hey, again, you really don't have anything to play for. LSU's not going to the championship. They're not winning a title. So get out because you don't want to risk another injury like you had in high school.
Absolutely. And I think the way you put it's good, because the truth is, I think Terrace Marshall is the exact kind of person who didn't want to leave. And that is why he waited as long as he did. Terrace Marshall, I wrote a story about a month ago about him, and it was basically just all these little stories about how he is just like not a normal star receiver. He's somebody who like picks up people's laundry around the facility, and is just like stays after and helps clean up, and is just like one of the highest character guys in that program. And people are now giving him flack for that speech he gave and all that. But here's the thing: people got to realize, and I know you do, if we're using a little hindsight here, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but my guess is that speech, if anything, was more of like, hey, I can leave. Give me a reason not to.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Hey, show up and let this be worth it, because I don't want to leave. And I think a few things happened. One, it just became clear, and this is my own opinion, but hey, with a freshman quarterback and everything going on right now, this can only make my film look worse, which goes to your point as well. And two, I think at the end of the day, the decision-making is pretty simple. I think a mass exodus pretty much happened this week across college football, and obviously agents and all those guys are a part of that. And, they're all hearing the same things. And like you said, at this point, he knows there's really not much to play for anymore. His offensive film's not going to look any better. And everyone's kind of opting out. And it's just time. And people have pointed out to me, this season's already going later than a season has ever gone.
Yeah.
And that time to prepare for the combine, as much as we mock the combine, it's real. It's a whole thing. You have to prepare for that. So it's kind of like, hey, I got to get out now, actually start preparing for that. And everyone else opting out. So it's just kind of the time if you don't have anything to play for.
One of our callers, one of our texters asked, so with Marshall opting out, who now do we look at in that receiving core as sort of the next big thing?
So, the immediate answer is they need to get Eric Gilbert more involved. And obviously he's had a pretty good year, and he hasn't, he's looked great whenever he has chances. But I don't know, and it's something we probably need to press them more about, if I'm being honest as a reporter, but their inability to kind of really get him involved is kind of fascinating, and it's kind of confusing. But obviously he's caught a few balls every game, but he should be, especially now, the focal point of this offense, the star, and I think it has to be him. But if you go after that, I think the honest answer, and it's not as an exciting of one, but it's Jere Jenkins. I think he's a guy who has been the most reliable by far this year and is a pretty talented guy. And then if I'll throw one out more, it's Kayshon Boutte, who has shown more big play ability than any of these guys left. But it's going to be tricky because other than Gilbert, I think the receivers are a group of everyone in that group is a good receiver who could play for any SEC team. They're all good, but now you've lost kind of your game changers. You don't really have anybody that will change the chemistry of a game, of play, except Gilbert. So I think it has to be him.
Yeah, it would certainly make sense. All right, last thing, Brody. I'm not going to ask you to name a score, but is this basically Bama can just pick their score, or do you think LSU has an opportunity to give them more of a game than everyone expects?
T-Bob Hebert, we both know, he kind of on our podcast kind of pointed out something that I don't completely disagree with, and it's just the idea that like LSU to some small extent does play could exceed a little bit more because of the competition level and play a little bit better than they. I don't think it's gonna, even though I think Alabama is 30 points better than them, I don't think it's gonna be like a 56-3 thing that it totally could be, by the way.
Right.
But my feeling is it's gonna be 42-20, something along those lines. They'll get a little bit. I also don't think Alabama's gonna run this up for a lot of weird reasons, but I think partially because LSU's numbers are so thin, and I've kind of heard some things about that. So I think it's going to be, like a 22-point.
Yeah, and by the way, like we both pointed out, Alabama is not the type of defense that normally LSU struggles with because they're not an exotic blitzing team that's going to look to confuse LSU. They're just going to blanket you with their combination zones, their spot zones that they use, that matchup zone is what they call it. They're going to use that, and I don't think they're going to be exotic against LSU and confuse them. So LSU, I think, will have the opportunity maybe to get some first downs here or there. I don't necessarily think they're going to turn into a bunch of points, but I don't think their offensive line will look as sort of mentally frustrated as they did in the game against A&M.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I think they will at least be able to move the ball. Do I think they will look great? No, of course not. But yeah, I think they will be able to get some movement, just look like a relatively competent offense, and defensively, I genuinely buy that they have improved this past month, that they have become at least a more stable group that isn't going to just inherently lose you games, but they are facing an offense that at the end of the day is arguably just as good as 2019 LSU, as bonkers as that is to say. So yeah, I think they will not embarrass themselves, which I think is honestly a win. As like silly as that is to say, if they can just look like they just lose to Alabama like everyone else, then I think you come out of that game at least not too upset.
Yeah, Brody, thank you for your time, brother. Much appreciated. Look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Absolutely, anytime. Always a pleasure, man. Take care.
Brody Miller from The Athletic in Baton Rouge. Good stuff.